Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever live Genealogy QuickStart broadcasting, multicasting on both Facebook Live and YouTube. So, pretty cool. How have you guys been? It's been, I won't say how long since I've done an episode, but figured it's a good time. I was prompted by some interesting folks to let's do a show. They didn't ask me to do a show. I talked them into doing a show, but they wanted to do something. And I said, that sounds like a show. So today I'd like to introduce you to two guests, Michael John Neill and James M. Beidler. Um, Michael and Jim, welcome.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here.
Good
So
to
I
see you,
missed the
Jamel.
joke. We were supposed to all start with our mask on, but I forgot. All right. So today on Genealogy Quick Start, we are going to talk about naturalizations and German names. So how have you guys been doing? Jim, you were actually on Genealogy Quick Start before.
I have had that distinct honor. Yes, I have, and so I know it's always four steps. Yep, 4 steps. So,
So that's one thing that you guys did a great job of is taking your talks and turning them into quick starts. So because it's the quick start, let's quickly get started. So I think we kind of we didn't draw any stars. I said, who wants to go first? And Jim was like, I'm going to go first. So
we went by age, but okay.
Oh, it was age. Okay. So Jim, we're going to start with you. So welcome. Thanks for joining today.
You bet.
So you're going to talk to us about German names. And let me pull up your PowerPoint for you. So Jim, tell us a little bit about you. Jim, you have, okay, we don't have the full hour to hear your bio because it would take that long. I'm so proud of you, Jim. Like, I remember before you had a book published and now you have like a shelf. So tell us about your publishings.
And my head still fits in the screen. That's a good thing. So. Well, I've had three commercially published books on German genealogy and one on newspapers. And the German ones include the German Genealogy Guide, Trace Your German Roots Online, and the Family Tree Historical Atlas of Germany. And today we're going to focus with the German names. Let's face it, names are a genealogist's stock in trade.
They really are. Names are huge. What's I forgot what that technical term is. I had the pleasure, the honor to take a class with Lloyd Bachstruck, and he talked about names. And this man did not look at one sheet of paper, and he just walked around and just spun this story about German names. I think it was like the gun story. Like it started out as one name in Germany and it came to the US and it ended up being gun or something. So what's that term? Is it onomology or something like that?
I don't know. I think I know what you're getting at.
Yeah, it's Latin and it has an I in it, but I forget what it is. I don't know. Something. The name's the same, and
it must have gone to the grave with poor Lloyd.
It went to the grave with Lloyd. So let me share just so we can get into take a look at Jim's presentation on German names. And let's see if we get that in here. There we go. So talk to us, Jim, about German names. We're going to do our quick start, of course. Let me get that going for you. So for our quick start for German names and German naming patterns, step 1 is create a list of names from American records. So talk to us about that.
Well, it's interesting. Just this morning on the Genealogy Squad, George Morgan was talking about, he made a post about how you've got to be a bad speller to be a good genealogist. And his point really was that you're going to encounter many different spelling variations for every individual's name. And the more of those variants, what the logical variants are, the more attuned you are to them, the fewer records you're going to miss that will have implications about your ancestor. For German ancestors, a lot of times you're hoping that a record will name the hometown in Europe. And so the more of those records, the greater volume of those American records that you have, the better your odds are of finding such a pure European origin.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying something that we say a lot about to African American researchers who's trying to get back into slavery, right? We are trying to just jump back into slavery, and you need to spend time with the known. So it sounds like you're saying that here. Spend time with the American records before you just try to jump the pond, as they say, right? So that's
Yep.
step one. You're going to get into that a little deeper with us. Let's look at step two. Evaluate the spelling, English versus German phonetics.
Yeah, this is crucial, and it's going to be crucial with any ethnics that have a different language other than English, because there will be different pronunciations of the individual letters that will create different spellings, and especially when it's some German speaking only person talking to an English speaking only clerk or census taker or what have you.
That it's how it sounds thingy. So you're going to show us some cool examples of that. Step three is to create. Oops, I'm not showing anything in my. I love when I do that. It's really enjoyable when I do that. Step three is to create variations using letter and symbol substitutions for the name. This sounds like where the magic happens, creating variations.
I've got my wand ready. Absolutely. And yeah, this is where the rubber hits the road, and I'm going to have a worksheet for you to look at, where you can basically collect the whole gamut of these spelling variations that then you can use as a checklist as you go through records.
Cool. So, oops, sorry. So let's take a look at step four, which is to use the variations to search American records.
Yeah, this is where you're hopefully going to find more records than you had perceived as applying to your ancestor before, and maybe things that you looked at previously and thought, oh, that can't be my person, or record sets that you thought there was nobody in there that now there are.
Okay, let's go ahead and go through the quick start. So step one that you have was to create a list of names from your American records. So talk to us about this.
Well, this is an individual. He's not my direct line ancestor. His name is Dealman Dobb. He was an immigrant as a child, and a Revolutionary War soldier while he was still a teenager. And then during his lifetime, he shows up in American records with all these different spelling variants. And especially with the D's and the T's, the B's and the P's. We're going to go into the reason for that in the second and third step. But the thing to realize is this is provably all the same person during his long life. He lived to be 89, died in 1849, and his third wife became his widow and kept getting his Revolutionary War pension until 1871.
Okay. So this is cool. You kind of just collected a lot of American records, like as many as you could. You went through, you just made a list of all of I'm just really shocked by like Tealman and, Dealman. Like I get it now that I see it, but I would have never kind of brought this up as name variants. So this is pretty cool. So I had asked you this before. So remember back in the day when we used to have to calculate the sound X.
Mhm.
Is there, and then like now, that's like an ancient art, and we don't have to think about doing it. So, is there any kind of something, what's the guy's name? Steve Morris. Has he created some kind of a website where you could put in a name and it'll create a list of spelling variants like this for you?
As far as he specializes in his so-called one-step processes.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
I think this requires more than one step,
Okay.
but I wouldn't count Steve out, and especially if you give him a challenge, he may come up with one.
Yeah. All righty. So let's move on to, oh, here's a record. Tell us about this record. Let me
Yeah,
show it.
Dealman
Do we see it?
Dobb.
Here we go.
Yeah, there we see it. So, which one of us is on tech after all? Uh, so, this is this is actually from my book on the Dobb family, showing a record from his pension file where he signed his name Dilman Daub. So, yeah, to some extent, we might think of this as the most official spelling of his name, but all those previous ones that I showed are ones where his name was often being spelled for him, and that's an important concept because in most records, it's not how your ancestor is going to be spelling their name. It's how they're going to be having it spelled for them by a census taker, by a courthouse clerk, or even a church pastor who may not know them well.
So let's all say this together so that everyone hears it. In genealogy, spelling doesn't count. You guys want to say it together? In genealogy,
Spelling
Spelling
does
doesn't count.
not count. Woo! All right. So thank you for that, guys. I say that all the time.
At least we
We're-
didn't have to sing it, so we're good.
Well, I was going to say we're a better webinar than a choir, that's for sure.
Let's move on to step 2, which is to evaluate the spelling English versus German phonetics. All right. So talk to us here. What is all of this? This looks like school.
Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, but at least it's not math. I think we got to wait. I think we got to wait until the math prof gets a hold of us, Michael. So no, but for this, we're learning that in the German language, there are several consonants that are pronounced very closely alike, and therefore are interchanged in the spelling that comes down to us in various records, and that this is what results in many of those spelling variants that we're talking about. And just in Dealman Dobb's name, the D and the T, the B and the P are two of the big deals. So, and then when we move on to the vowels, we have umlauts.
Umlaut. I love umlauts. Is that the umlaut? This is the umlaut. I love the umlaut. All right.
They are two dots. If we move on to the next slide, we see a little bit about umlauts. They're generally only over the A, the O, and the U in German, those vowels. They're the equivalent of an E following them, and it changes the sound. It changes the sound so that English-speaking people can't really pronounce that umlauted vowel as it would be in German. Basically, you take your lips like you're going to pronounce that long E.
Wait, we need to see this.
E. But then you actually pronounce the other letter. So you got E. For an A, it would be E, something like that. And it's more like an umlauted A in German is more like a long A, whereas an easy for me to say.
Unumlauted.
Umlaut. I'm glad we have you here, Michael.
I understand why you drink beer. Maybe we need some beer in order to do the umlauts.
I'll be right back. No.
Umlauts.
So the short course is it changes the vowel sound, and I have a example here from my own lineage the Crick family, which becomes Crick with a K, Crick with a C, and Creek, because those are all kind of sort of pronunciations. And here we see from the early days, from the 1730s, from a church book in Berks County, in the upper right-hand corner, that Franz Krieg, his actual name here, the pastor wrote it down as Grieg, G-R-I-G. And here he was sponsoring a baptism, and that just shows the many different pronunciation alikes that you end up with.
Fantastic, fantastic. So love that. I love old records. Sorry, I messed up on your little animation there. Step 3, create variations using the letter and syllable substitutions for the name. All right, this is the magic part, huh?
Yes, it is. It goes by the short name of PNK, but it's the Phonetischen Namenkarte. And yes, Michael, this is my own creation. Don't try to take it away.
It sounds like call it the punk. PNK. Call it the punk.
The punk.
You've been punked. Yeah.
Or punked. Auf Deutsch punkt. So, yeah, what this is taking either a surname or a place name. I mean, you could do it with a given name too, but generally it's the surname that we're needing to look up records of. And you take the way it's found in American records, what I call the garbled version, and then you try to de-garble it using German phonetics to create a list of the different variants that you might find records of this surname in these different spelling variants. That's yes, and if you want to get a free download of the PNK, or get punked, so to say, just send me an email to my Legacy Tree email, and I'll be glad to send it. Although you better put an L in Beidler.
Sorry. Wait, I sped up.
That might have been my typo. So
okay, thank you. I was taking on more than I should.
I'll take
you can't spell his own last name. Okay.
It's one of the variants. So.
But guess what? Why he can't spell? Do you remember why he can't spell?
Because I'm a good genealogist.
Doesn't count in genealogy.
Yes. So, okay. So then if we move on another slide, we get to the variants for the Dobbs surname, and yeah, this is because what I recommend is that you basically go letter by letter or syllable by syllable. An example of syllable by syllable is German. Some names, when they get anglicized, they'll have the last syllable of B-A-U-G-H, which some people then end up pronouncing Baugh or Bog. Well, it's really the German Bach, B-A-C-H is what it originally was. But in this name, the D, the T, or the T-H can be the lead letter. The second letter is often an O or an A. Most modern Dobbs in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania, spell it with the A. The U is in this name is always the third letter. Is always that you can see as constant. And then the last letter, again, just as with the first letter, where you have one of these consonants that the Germans like to interchange, the B and the P. Mm-hmm. So you put these all together into the witch's brew, and you come out with all these different variants that you should be looking up in indexed records to make sure you get all the records of the family that you're looking for.
So this is the magic. So now this is kind of like these are your variations that you now use. This is the brew. You're stirring the brew.
He is always stirring the pot. Let me tell you.
There's truth to that.
So these are all the variations you use. So how do you? So tell me. So I'm a person who like loves lineage software and like whatever I do, because this right here is work. How do you, is there a way you save this? Like, how do you have a whole bunch of ancestors and a whole bunch of surnames. Where do you save this work and how do you save it for reference?
Well, usually there are notes fields in genealogy software. That would be one way to do it. I'll admit I'm still kind of a manual guy. I still have manila folders that I have my genealogy in. So, and by the way, I already got an email from somebody wanting a copy of the P&K. Not to
Yes,
brag or anything, but
oh, Michael, he's talking to you. I had no
Yeah,
doubt.
I realize that. I realize that.
yeah, there might be a little friendly rivalry between our fan bases. So.
You know, probably the easiest way is to make a Word document, make a page for each name, and keep a list of for each name. Just list them out on a Word document. That'd be a quick way, because then I would even do them as you do them all at once when you're thinking about it. Kind of when you're in the process of making the variant names and you've got all that in your head. Do it for Snufferman and Hauferman and Bukamugam and whatever you got, and just make a page for each one.
What did you call Jim?
I can't reveal that without clearance.
He just came snorting out of the Black Forest there. So.
All righty, so we have our list of variations, and so now what we want to do. Oh, so what is this?
I don't know. What is it?
What?
I think we're a little too far here. As a matter of fact, I think we're.
Oh, are we?
No, we're not. No, I'm sorry, we're not. No. I forgot my own slides. This was just, again going back to these spelling variants that I found, Deal and Dob. The only one that would not be reflected by the P&K was this Daube name.
Okay.
This was obviously an English-speaking clerk that was trying to put English language phonetics to the name he heard, because there's no silent E in German. That's
Okay.
or a DHYLE. That's
Okay.
absurd. This was in a court record that I think in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. So.
Okay. All right. So
Well, you make your list of all the ones like he suggested. If you make the list like he suggested and you're looking manually, you're going to catch those other ones.
Mhm.
You've gone through the work of making his list, and so if it's a little bit different, it'll look like one of the ones in your list, and you should hopefully catch it if you're reading things that are unindexed.
It's a good cue to you. Yeah.
But there's a question. Once you have these, they ask, once you have the surname in German, do you need to do these variations?
Well, you should because yes, spelling doesn't count, but the records in Germany are not going to be consistent in spelling. They're going to be consistent almost always phonetically, but you may find that with the D or the T, interchanging even in the church registers. Sometimes even in the same document, the same baptism, you might find a name spelled two different ways.
Marie Capaldi says elbow pump from Pennsylvania. And we have so many people here. Thank you guys for coming. Dee Tittle. We have Valerie Meltzer. We have Carolyn Thompson. She's a Jersey one. She comes to my stuff. Den Payne 13 says hello from the Netherlands. And they're having fun. They're enjoying you guys. All right, let's move on. Go ahead.
Just wait till Michael comes on. So.
Let's not get started with Michael. Step 4.
I was going to say, not until we do step 4. Yeah.
There we go.
So for step 4, you now want to take those variations and use them to search American records. So, you can't see anything again. I'm going to get it. I'm just so used to having people to support me. Go ahead.
we're making you multitask, Shamel. So,
Mhm.
yeah, this step 4 is every record, no matter how trivial, of the immigrant and the immigrant's children, is a potential record that might list a village of origin in Europe. So therefore, even if the classic example is, even if you have an obituary from an English language newspaper, you should also be looking for an obituary from a German language newspaper, because usually the names will be a whole lot less garbled. I mean, and likewise, even if you have obituaries from English language and German language newspapers, try to find a church burial record. Yes, sometimes it'll only give the name of the individual, their age and years, and the cemetery they were plopped in. But it might also give a lot more information, and it might be better information than is in the obituaries.
Cool, 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 cool.
And so just, this is just going over the whole gamut of different records. I mean, I've found villages of origin. Usually it's in the church records is your best shot, but I've found it on tombstones. I've found them in family Bibles and registers. I've found them in baptisms of the children who were not the direct line ancestor of the client I was working for when I used to do independent research. So you've gotta look in a vast gamut of records, and even lesser known church records like church membership records. And I have an example here of finding Johann Caspar Dorbot in the church records of the Strawberry Point Lutheran congregation in Iowa. Yeah, get the tech crew to do the animation, Shamel. If you see
Oh wait.
you, you see him here, the third line down, and it is showing that Johann Caspar Dorbot, he was born in 1826 and was born in Neustadt an der Zahle, which, since there are more than 30 Neustadts in Germany, actually, as it turned out, there were 2 Neustadt an der Zahle cities too, but still, it did narrow things down quite a bit, and this was a good record. It was the only record that was going to give his village of origin, that turned out to give his village of origin in Germany.
So, Jim, in general, like with this list of records that you shared, for looking for German records in America, are there special places to look for those records?
I mean, the church records are best. And again, church records for the entire family, including the baptisms of all the children, not just your direct line ancestors' children, the marriages of all the children of the immigrant. They might have information. The death certificates of the immigrant's children, which
Mhm.
often list parents.
Mhm.
All of those are potential ones, and we're going to hear a little bit more about this shortly. Naturalizations are good.
Oh yeah, are you leading in? Are you doing the lead in? So,
That
Jim, I want to ask you this about American records in German. I know, like with each ethnic group, there are different things, different um, ways that we are listed in records, or how to find us in records. Are there special, like for African Americans, we know sometimes we're listed in the back or we're not listed in the book at all. We might be in a separate book. Are there instances in history where German names might not be where you expect them to be because of their nationality?
uh, I mean, the only, I would hearken back to the phonetics, that, obviously, if you're only looking for Dobbs under the D's and not also under T and TH, you're not going to find them in those other parts. One thing I would say is, there's a substantial number of Jewish people who have who were in Germany, sometimes for centuries up until the Holocaust. And a lot of times, as the civil records were starting in the 1800s, they would be, at first, they started them as church book duplicates of the baptisms, the Christian baptisms, marriages, and burials. Jewish people a lot of times were required to register their births in those Christian books until there were true civil records. So,
okay, that's an interesting note there.
I would
Michael,
probably add, if you're looking at church records of a German immigrant congregation, expect the pastor to write in the German script and the English script and maybe Latin in the same baptismal entry. I mean, you've got to learn some of the traditional German script, even if they're in English language, because he still may make letters in that script, even though the language is in English.
He was showing off.
He was, or he'd been in the communion wine a little too much. And that's that you really want a sober you don't want him doing that before he writes your ancestors' baptismal entry. That's after you get done.
That's where you get the extra variations, like that E.
Yeah, because if you're unfamiliar with that script and you think it's in English, but because they'll lapse and just do one word in German, and it can be very confusing if you're not thinking of that possibility.
Or worst of all, he may trail off to USW, und so weiter, which basically means etc. In other words, I'm going back to that communion wine for another slug. So,
all right, you guys be thankful that they wrote them in there at all. Be nice.
Exactly. Yep.
So I'd like to tell you guys that Sharon B. from Atlanta says hello, as well as Ann Victoria Paras from Knoxville, and Jenny Watton from Nebraska.
Hello.
Hello. So Jim, oh wait, I'll ask you guys about the myths at the end. You guys gave me some myths, because with any type of research, there's always like some crazy things that people think. So we need to dispel some myths at the end.
They'll still be myths a half an hour from now.
Yeah.
So.
No, we're gonna kill them. We're killing. These myths are going to be dead at the end of this hour. That's the rule. So Michael, welcome.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
So we are going to talk about, why isn't it going? You call your presentation, that's half cut off here for reasons I have, here we go, called Naturalization and Unnatural Process. Why is it an unnatural process, Michael?
Well, I called it that because I thought the title was clever.
Oh, you were just being funny?
No, attempting is probably the better word. In part because before, we talk about 1906 as kind of a watershed year, but before, and even after to an extent, but before 1906, there was some debate about, especially in terms of women and their citizenship and naturalizations. But before 1906, any court could naturalize. And so slightly different courts may do it slightly differently. And some of the procedure, there was the 5-year time span, or specific time spans you had to live here, but certain other minor details, different courts may interpret things a little bit differently, or particularly when you've got county judges naturalizing people on counties across the United States, one might be a little more of a stickler for things than someone else. And so and people were confused about, for reasons we'll get into in the lecture, the discussion, people were sometimes confused about their own citizenship status, particularly if they immigrated as children and their father naturalized. They might not even know what they were naturalized or not. That type with women's citizenship rights are mainly why I chose that title, although I thought it was kind of neat to use the same word twice in the title, which
I like
alliteration. I suppose.
Does that count for alliteration?
No, because one is an N and one is a U.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
All right. There's a word for what that is. But what was I going to ask you? So Michael, before we get into naturalization and your QuickStart that you created for naturalization, You've been doing root dig, like I think that's the first thing that I know you to have done, and then you do genealogy tip of the day. How long have you been doing genealogy tip of the day?
Genealogy tip of the days, I've run that for about over 10 years, slightly over 10 years. And it
Wow.
started
That's a
on
lot of days.
it is a lot of days. And some days there's more than one because I just, it's like I told everybody earlier, I just kind of write them when I think of them. I don't schedule them. I don't sit down on Monday and say, I'm going to make 20 here and we're just going to crunch them out. It's usually as I'm doing something or as I'm thinking of something, that's a tip.
Don't let anybody that I talk about writing blogs to hear you say that, because I'm like a stickler. You need to do 10 ahead of time. So you just kind of just go, woo,
Oh,
you're a brave man. But look, your
it's just,
longevity is amazing.
yeah, it's just my excuse is that makes them fresh. That's the once in a while I schedule them, but not really very often. I've kind of gotten that method, so I'm used to it. It's just
So
what you're
you have
used to.
done something interesting with your 10 years worth of genealogy tips of the day last year in 2019. What's that?
I put the first approximately 2.5, 3 years in book form, which was I self-published that on Amazon. Which, if I'd known what self-publishing was when I started, I'm not sure I would have done it. But it's been a good experience.
Uh-oh.
But it's a lot more work than a person realizes. Um, but we put them in I put them in book form, and that was fun. Took out the ones that were repetitive, took out some other material, the marketing stuff, and just put tips in there. But we're pretty excited. We're still pretty excited about that. But self-publishing is a challenge.
So what I'm
Yeah.
excited about is your quick start, because I've tried to understand nationalization for a while, and I think now having it in a quick start manner, it will help me. So let's move on to the quick start for naturalization. So step one is to determine the immigration naturalization time frame. So what does that mean?
You want to roughly figure out, because if they follow the rules, naturalization should follow after, if being the operative word there, should follow after that. So you want to have a rough time period when they emigrated. That will lead you to the earliest time period they could have naturalized. So you have a rough ballpark of when you should search the records and look for different records to access those. And we'll get into that in a little more when we talk about this step.
All right. And we have step two, determine the residence when eligible for naturalization. So that sounds like the immigration location and the naturalization location sounds like they could be different. Is that what that's saying?
They could be different because, again, if you follow the laws, which is always the big if, you're not naturalizing until you've been here for 5 years at least, longer
5 years.
for some individuals. So, they might have landed in New York or on the East Coast, stayed there for a little bit, and then went to Albuquerque or wherever. And so those naturalization papers typically are where they settled.
Okay. So we'll talk more about that, because you told me some kind of tricky scenarios that were kind of mind blowing. And I think that's why it's kind of difficult for people to get these records. Step three is find the courts of records when eligible for naturalization. So you have it plural, courts. What does that mean in step three?
Before 1906, any court of record in the United States could naturalize. Those were typically county courts. In most areas, it was one, but in larger areas, it might have been more than one court that did that. They also might have naturalized in a neighboring county's court for one reason or another that we'll get into. But unlike other records that are really specific to where the person was living, and there's one option to find it. Naturalizations, especially before 1906, there's several courts where you should consider looking when you're trying to find those records.
Okay, and then we have step four, just to make it interesting, right, Michael? It can't just be one.
Of course.
Step four is to locate and find records with naturalization information.
And
Let's go ahead.
Well, in a sense, that's pretty self-explanatory. We talk about the courts that could be where your records are at. Then we'll have to see how to access those. How do you access those? Typically, it's not unless it's later, in which it's a federal record, and that's a little more of a challenge sometimes. But we'll see how to actually go about getting those records in step 4, because sometimes there's more than one way to get the same piece of paper or record.
Yep. So let's take a look at step 1, which is determine the immigration naturalization time frame. So I know census records are fantastic, what you list here, to kind of give you information about that. Talk to us about what you have here.
And again, hopefully it's self-explanatory. If your people died before this, it's not going to be helpful. But if the time frame is right, the 1900 through the 1930 census asks for years. It varies in terms of what exact questions it asks, but they center on the year they emigrated and or the year they naturalized. And if your person was alive in that time frame, that's where you want to start to get a rough idea of when they naturalized or emigrated, because that, again, those two things are tied. Keep in mind, when they gave that information to the census clerk, he asked them a year and they gave a year from this thing called their head. So it could very easily be off. But use it as a starting point. It could be that in their obituary, there's a specific mention, not of the naturalization date, but of a date of immigration, which would lead you to a rough time period for the naturalization again. The date may be specifically stated in the obituary. It may be suggested. You may have to read between the lines to get that date from the obituary. Personal family.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
The personal family papers. It's like with Jim's example about some of those things that may give the town of origin. You just never know what's going to be written on some piece of paper stuck in grandma's old purse from 1910. But passports are the one thing that comes to mind. If somebody went back to visit, maybe after the war, in between the wars or whatever, there's going to be good information in that passport.
So it sounds like you're saying kind of the same thing Jim said in his is to collect all the American records that you can and pull out find anything in there that kind of, in African American research, we like to call it bridge information. It's little tidbits that bridge the gap between freedom and back to enslavement. And so you're looking for little tidbits that will bridge the gap between American and the foreign country.
That, as much as I hate to admit Jim is right, that's pretty much it. But that's what most genealogists have to do is bridge that gap. It's a little, depending upon your ethnic background and time period, it may be a little different how you do it, but that's the essence of it. You've got to make that connection somehow, regardless of what person you're looking for.
So let's look at step 2, which is determine the residence when eligible for naturalization. So I love that you're about to explain to me something that, declaration, naturalization, like I get it, but I don't get it because it seems different at different time periods. So help us understand what's going on here with the 2-step process first.
Theoretically, naturalization is a 2-step process. The first step, the first part of that is to declare, and again, we're talking about based on the U.S. Constitution, not during the colonial era, the federal period, if you will. The first step is to declare your intent to become a citizen. And normally that can be done as soon as you're here. You have to be here. You have to be of the legal age of majority because you're signing out a statement. So an 18-year-old male typically can't declare his intent to become a citizen. But that's done almost as soon as possible if that's their intent. And so that could be done, the family might have ended up in Iowa, but maybe they lived in Kentucky for 3 years and in New York for 6 months before that. They could have the men could have declared their intent anywhere along the route to wherever they ended up, not having needed to have done that where they settled. It could have been in New York for that 6-month period or Kentucky for that couple-year period. The naturalization is that final document where you are declared to be a citizen that was not born here. And usually you've got to wait 5 years from when you arrive before you can do that. So from a locating the record standpoint, you got to think about where they were 5 years after they got off the boat. Where were they? It might be where they lived the rest of their life, and it still could be somewhere they stayed. I've got one family where they landed. They all came here in the 1840s, 50s. They were in north central Kentucky for about 8-10 years, and then they came out to Illinois. So in that case, some of them were in Kentucky long enough to do important things in Kentucky, and then they went to Illinois, and some of them continued. They were Germans, so it was beer and not whiskey, but I saw that reference there. But the key is they're leaving those records in all those different places. They could have naturalized in Kentucky. They didn't for one reason or another. But it's a two-step process, and we'll get into more of what's in those records in one of our next steps.
And so, okay, so you had given me an example of someone coming in from Germany to New York and declaring, and then moving to Kansas at some point in that 5 years and naturalizing. So their records are going to be, those two records are going to be in two separate places.
The naturalization would have been filed in Kansas. The declaration would have been filed in New York. Now, what can happen in some instances when they declare, they get a copy of their declaration.
Okay. I was going to ask you what it ever put together.
It's not like a green card, and we're not going to have that discussion. But
okay.
It's kind of similar, not really.
Okay.
But when they would file their final papers, they might sometimes have to take that declaration in when they file their final papers.
As proof.
The naturalization, right, as proof that they started the process. In some places, in some time periods, when you naturalize, they would say, give us your first paper because we're going to file it here with that. If you're really lucky, they did that.
Okay.
I've seen counties where they've done that, but they didn't always do that. Okay. And as we mentioned before, when you and I talked this morning, the real important document is, once you've naturalized, that's the important document. That's the one that matters. That's the one that says you're done, you're a citizen. The declaration isn't so important at that point.
So hold up now, hold up. So there's importance and then there's information, right? Doesn't the declaration provide a lot of information?
Well, in terms of genealogy, yes. In terms of the court process, no.
Right.
In terms of their citizenship, it's the naturalization that matters. For us as a genealogist, we want both those records.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right, let's move on. Here's a record.
Here's a record. As Jim knows, I have to use Trotvetter in every presentation, if at all possible.
So what's the Trotvetter? I saw that you guys in your emails. I'm like, is this an inside joke? What's the Trotvetter?
It's my grandmother's maiden name, and I write about this family rather frequently. And so Jim is, since it's a German name, Jim has just kind of become enamored with it, and it's kind of a running back and forth.
Oh, not the Trotvetters again. Okay, I get it.
Exactly. Yeah. This is his declaration of intent from 1855. And again, not every place kept these records after the guy's naturalized, but his says his age, his town of birth isn't quite right, but it's close enough to get you to find him. Basically, it's got his birth date, it's got to whom he owed allegiance, and the date he left Bremen and the date he arrived in Baltimore in 1853.
Okay.
And with all the details in that document, you could find the manifest and other information about him. It goes back to what Jim said. You get that one document that gives you a lot of clues. You can really go from there with that.
Exactly. So we were talking about details in records. I think we went through most of this.
Pretty much in our other discussion. In general, just to make it kind of really quickly summarize what's on the slide, like a lot of records, the earlier, the less information is in the record. That's true with a lot of things. The declarations can contain, like we saw in the previous slide, or it can simply say, my name is Johann Schniffermerhagen. I'm giving up allegiance to the King of Prussia, the end. And naturalizations are the same way. What you want to look for on the naturalizations is to see if there were any witnesses who vouched for them. It could be the county sheriff. I've got one where it was the county sheriff, so it wasn't that big of a clue. but it could be fellow Germans, if they're German or Irishmen or whatever, who have already the key to being a witness was you had to be a citizen over the age of 18 or over the age of consent. And so if it's another Irishman or another German or another Swede or whatever the ethnic group, and you're really stuck on your guy, you want to look at those witnesses carefully because they could be relatives.
So it sounds like cluster genealogy, of course, is very important here.
Pretty much. When you're, if all Jim's tricks about how to find the village don't work, then you really, and I'm making it.
Which of course they will.
Yeah, they will. But once in a great while, they don't. And that's when the cluster becomes really important. And the witnesses, these are some people on these naturalizations that are key people to look for. They don't have to be related. They're just a warm body at the age of consent that's vouching for your ancestry.
So I have a question. D. Tittle ask, does the age of majority change during the years of the states?
Age of majority is set by state statute, so it theoretically can change. Very typically, in the past it has been 21 for a guy, 18 for a female. But keep in mind, for the naturalizations that we're talking about before the 1920s, before the early 20th century, women really don't matter. It's a good thing we're not face to face. I can't get anything thrown at me here. And I say that, and hopefully anybody.
I know, what the heck? Okay,
anybody who knows women's, the legal history of women's rights is the problem here. And in terms of citizenship, I think this is in one of the slides. I'm kind of getting off on my slide.
You are, because you said you all that energy about women and mattering. Okay. Well, I know you were just playing.
I know. And we'll get into that with that slide. Why that's we got to remember half our ancestors are female, the other half are men, and the other half, we can't do math. If you got three halves there, this is 1934 document from a naturalization application. It's what's called a certificate of arrival. If you can see it, what he had to do when he naturalized in 34, and keep in mind, this is a post-1906 document. He's having to vouch for the fact, I arrived here, this is the name of the ship, the date it landed, and then it's signed. I keep pointing at the screen, but you can't see me do that. It made me feel better. And then the district office in New York, this gentleman has looked at the manifest and said, yes, Panagiotis Veracruz appears on this manifest, on this date, on this ship. You're not going to see that from 1850 or 1834. Don't get all excited.
Okay.
It's a post-1906 thing.
Gotcha.
But he did, as you can see, he was here 20 years before he naturalized.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. That's a nice segue. That was accidental, but it's a nice segue to what's on the next slide. Are the reasons for naturalization? Why naturalize? The numero uno biggie is to vote. And that's why, for women before a certain era, since they didn't have the right to vote, that didn't matter. To get a federal homestead, if the federal government's going to give you land in the Midwest, you're going to have to show you're a citizen if we're going to give you a government handout, basically. Exaggerating that too, just a little bit for effect. But if you weren't a citizen, you had to, when you filed your homestead initial claim, you had to include a copy of your declaration, so they knew you at least had started the process. And so, in a homestead record, if your person homesteaded and you don't know where they naturalized and you want to know, you should look in their homestead application, because in their homestead application, there will be, if they were not a native-born citizen, there will be documentation of their naturalization or declaration of intent in that homestead. And that's how, for people of mine that were in Nebraska, I know where they naturalized in Illinois or whatever, places I wasn't aware they had lived, because they had to include that paperwork when they got they applied for their homestead.
So did women homestead? And did
a few women? Yes, actually, a few women did homestead, and that's why I'm thinking of the Dakotas, where there are counties where you see women naturalizing in the 1900s and the 1910s before they got the right to vote. those women were naturalizing because they wanted to get a homestead.
Okay.
And you can't get a homestead, they let women get a homestead for one reason or another. Sometimes it was so one family could get more than one homestead. That's a separate issue. But if she naturalized, she could get a homestead.
Okay.
So that's one reason why women would naturalize. In some states, and this ties back into that slide we saw before, that gentleman got divorced about 1930-ish. And in some states, aliens could not file suit.
So you couldn't sue somebody for a
You couldn't sue somebody. Probably for most of us, the main reason why our ancestor, who was an immigrant, might have sued somebody, he's wanting to get divorced, or he was a day laborer and his employer didn't pay him for 6 months and he had to do something. He can't shoot him because you go to jail. So and see what happens. But you can't. If I'm an immigrant, you're not paying me. And this ties into a lot of modern issues too, if you think about it for a second. If I'm an immigrant and you don't pay me in 1910, I can't sue you for not paying me unless I'm a citizen.
Right.
You can't get divorced either if that's what's going on. So that was another reason.
So Michael, I'm going to go on to the next step, which is step 3, is find the courts of record when eligible for naturalization. So this is the 1906. So 1906
thing again. If it's before 1906, any court of record could naturalize. And so you want to keep that in mind. Usually it's a local county court or any one of the county courts, or if a area has a larger population. After that, it was supposed to be cut off, boom, today. After that date, everything was a federal naturalization. Well, it wasn't for a while because some counties didn't want to give that up right away for the fees, the political pull, whatever. But once we get to the 30s and the 40s, most counties had given up that right or had it taken from them, and those are pretty much all federal court records from that point on.
Is that your cat sleeping?
Yes, that is the cat. That's the cat. Yes, that is the cat that you hear.
I said, is Jim having an active dreaming? Is he dreaming and snoring? So I muted his mic, and I still heard it.
Yeah,
I knew what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
I am blameless. So
for today, anyway. Yeah, for this time.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to, we talked about women a bit. So you talked about before 1907, it was their marital status.
Right. Usually determined that there was a little bit of ambiguity how different courts would interpret it differently, whether the woman's marital status totally affected her citizenship status or not. There wasn't consistency.
Like once in between 1907 and 22, it was odd. It was definite.
No, a woman born in New York, if she married a Greek immigrant, she was immediately a natural-born alien because of that. And because her citizenship status was tied to that of her husband.
So that's interesting. Do you know when it changed? Because that's always like a funny thing that people marry.
In 1922. In 1922 is when it changed, after women got the right to vote. And what brought it before women had the right to vote, it wasn't such a key issue, a woman's citizenship status. But once women could vote, then if they weren't citizens, that was a problem. And so what happened, the story is there were women that had fought for the right to vote, and they had descended from the Pilgrims and on and on and on, and now they married a Swede who won't naturalize, and they can't vote. and they're just besides themselves, and so they're upset about that. Understandably so. We're making fun of it, but understandably so. And so that's what brought about the Cable Act. It's like a lot of other things that legislation that affects the records, that affects things that we do. It's usually the result of some social things that are going on. There we go, under the background, and that's why in 1907 they were fussing about immigration. But in the late teens, early 20s, it's women's right to vote that has kind of precipitated this. And at that point in time, after the Cable Act of 22, then the citizenship status of a husband and wife were separate. Before the citizenship,
1922. When you post 19, because that's when we were, on our own. So,
Right.
Michael, what is this? I love this record.
This is, I think it's a 1910 census record, but the key here, can they see both those dates? I can't on my
I'm
screen.
going to make it big.
Okay. This is one of those censuses that asks for the year you immigrated and the year that you naturalized. And I'm not sure you can see the naturalization year, but
No.
the year that she immigrated was 1887, and the year that she naturalized was 1888. And the NA stands for naturalization. And what had happened here, she had come over as a child with her mother in 87. And the following year, her mother marries a naturalized German. And so when her mother marries that naturalized German a year after her mother and she have been here, she becomes a citizen. It's called a derivative citizenship. Her citizenship is derived from that of her father.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so if you see that they immigrate and naturalize in less than 5 years, you should definitely try to look into the why.
Assuming the dates are right. And this is why she was aware of her citizenship status, but sometimes that's why individuals that immigrated in this time period were not aware of that.
So, Michael, we are running up on the hour. I'd like to get to step 4.
We're going to get to step 4 because I'm gonna push through step 4 here.
Which is to locate and search records.
Exactly, locate and search. Keep in mind, naturalizations are public court records, and because they're public, you can access those records. Many of them are ones that the Family History Library has microfilmed and consequently has digitized. So Family Search will be the place to start looking for those records of naturalization, searching in the family history catalog. If that doesn't work, you would contact the local county court. Historical or genealogical society in the area may also be able to help you and give you some pointers, because chances are you are not the first person to look for naturalization records in that location. If it's after that point in time, after the federal takeover of the process, if you will, then those are at the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, and they have a process by which you access those records. It takes the rest of your natural life, but there is a process to that. This is just one little quick example. This is a declaration of intent. He's signing his English name. Well, his English name is written there, but he's kind of messed up Heinrich Mueller in some way, shape, or form. So you always want to compare those signatures to what name is written there. It's a good way to ties into what Jim was talking about a little bit. The English version is there, but oftentimes they would sign the German version of their name roughly on those documents.
I'm just letting Maria see that slide again. I think that's the slide she wants. And this right here, this slide.
This was just kind of a wrap-up slide. This was one of my tips of the day a couple years ago, I guess now, with just kind of some key points. These were key points before I wrote the QuickStart, so it's going to be a little different than the QuickStart because it was pre-QuickStart. Just some things to remember about the 1906 date, the importance of intent. We didn't talk about minor naturalizations, but those are naturalizations when somebody comes here as a child, and then when they naturalize, they're an adult. The process is a little different, and they're filed with naturalization, but they may be in a separate physical book from the naturalizations.
Okay.
And then the last two things are things we've already talked about. Homesteaders would document their naturalization, and those dates in census records for immigration and naturalization take with a big grain of salt when you're seeing those dates.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, thank you so much. Sorry we didn't have more time at the end to chat a little more, but Jim, I didn't get them. So how can people get in contact with you?
It's jamesmbeidler.com. There's an email link there. Or my legacy tree genealogist email, james.beidler@legacytree.com.
And Michael, how can people get in touch with you?
Probably the easiest way is to hit the contact me or the more about me on the genealogytipoftheday.com.
Okay.
That's
Guys,
fun, but when you have to call your domain host, that your website is not working and you have to tell them your domain name, those guys have an awful time when I say it's genealogyoftheday.com. It's awful.
It's
Never
too
going to spell that right. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guys, I really appreciate you, as did a lot of other folks. Lots of comments, lots of thanks. Please reach out to these guys, and thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you for
them.
having us.
We
Yes,
will
thank you.
do
Thank you,
this
Shamel.
again. You guys have a great day.
Peace out.
Don't go anywhere, you two.
Not leaving.
Stay healthy, everyone.